My first real memory of grasping the concept of death was as a child of no more than 7. I remember staring intently into the ground from the balcony and thinking, my family is going to be buried someday. Then began a brief season of pleading with God to make an exception for the Abraham family and ascend us directly into heaven. That did not last long, however, because my parents, to their credit, did not shield their children from the realities of life. Besides, the torrid pace of living in Mumbai just did not allow for it. Their train commutes were extremely hectic. There was a need to make fresh meals, do chores over the weekends, spend half a day at church on Sundays. There just was no room to ease their children gently into the inevitabilities of life. I went to funerals with my parents as a kid. I distinctly remember um, looking at a gravestone in the Shivri Cemetery in Mumbai. That image is still imprinted on my mind. It was a gravestone with fern and weeds sticking out from the sides. This was a child who lived barely for a year, going all the way back to 1929. Anyway, my attitude toward death was shaped by Christian teaching and certainly my parents' modeling of it. I still remember we had a neighbor who lived opposite from our house who had a death in their family. And my mom opened our doors both literally and figuratively, whereas the other three neighbors who spent far more time with them had their doors coldly shut because death was dark, frightening, and inauspicious. A lot of these thoughts are coming back into my mind presently because of all of the chatter about longevity and lifespan investigations. These are currently areas where there is a fair bit of biotech investment as well as research interest. Brian Johnson, who you must have heard of, he's a California based tech entrepreneur who famously lives by the motto, do not die. He is known as the world's most measured man. He developed the blueprint protocol and he has shared it publicly. He speaks of how he engaged in his earlier days in a lot of self sabotaging dietary behaviors. To the extent he advocates for the need for healthy diet as well as exercise through discipline, that's a message that should be commended. It's one that we certainly need to hear more often. However, in this view of death as a mortal combatant, physical death is a technical problem, as described by Yuval Noah Harari, and technical problems require technical solutions. So instead of grappling with the weight of death, the biohacking zealot tracks each output of physiology. I listened to a podcast conversation between two physicians where one spoke about how they had a distinct realization of the moment of his father's passing, even without being by his bedside at the time of his death. They spoke candidly about the various medical intrusions in the final moments of a patient's life. And I realized that even for someone who does not have faith, who might be an atheist or agnostic, there is an incalculable, inarticulable recognition of the gravity of death and some sort of a foreboding of the return of this person's soul to some sort of an eternal source. And this is true, I think, even amongst empirically trained, scientifically reasoning minds who otherwise in their day-to-day lives might be completely closed off to any consideration about an omnipresent, omniscient being. Grief, I think, makes a man, especially in their isolated moments, to consider death, to stare at death as if they were standing at the mouth of a tunnel and they're looking at the grim outline of this approaching shadow that is becoming increasingly clear and it's hurtling towards them at a rapid pace. Yet, very characteristic of the age that we live in, where signaling social standing amongst a peer group is so important relative to any actual sacrificial virtue, these thoughts must be brushed away. It's morbid. Why ruminate on such unpleasant thoughts? And instead, they switch to As the Bible puts it, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. So I want to close off with this passage from my blog, stitching together a few verses from the Bible. But what if it is appointed for man to die? And what if no one has power over the time of their death? Even more, what if the dead are raised? Sobering still, what if everything is laid bare before one to whom we must give account? Only having cancelled the charges against us, will death be swallowed up in victory. Until then, neither evasion nor defiance, prodding nor measuring, meditation nor self-actualization will remove the sting of death.